Welcome. We are the New Dad Rock.
Welcome, everyone. Have we got a special treat for you, Keith? We are joined by the illustrious Brian Reese.
Wait, the Brian Reese?
The same.
Who's Brian Reese?
He's one of my friends, and a neighbor, most importantly. And Brian likes dad rock.
Like dad rock or the New Dad Rock?
Yes. So without further ado, please give a new dad rock welcome to Brian Reese. Yay.
Hey, thanks, Steve. Thanks, Keith. Glad to be here.
So, Brian, the reason we brought you in here was because of an offhand comment I made, or Keith made, actually, I think in the last episode. We were talking about Ice Cream Man and Van Halen, and I was like, dude, we should get Brian on here. So we wanted to talk about Van Halen, and then you asked me a question, like, around the same time. What was your question again?
So my question is are you allowed to like Van Halen once Sammy Hagar joined, or do you have to do you have to pretend they never recorded again once Sammy came on board?
Yeah, great question. Let's get to that in a minute, but first...
Tell us a little about yourself.
Dude, you should tell them about your Rush jacket.
So let's see, the Rush jacket. I had a jean jacket with all of my concert buttons, as we all had back in the day. And I was going to the Rush show in, I think it was 1990, at the Nassau Coliseum.
Presto!
Exactly. And decided I wanted to do something fancy with my jacket, so I went to the Long Island Merchandise Mart. And there was a guy way in the back who did custom airbrushing. And I brought him the picture of rock, paper, scissor, and perfectly airbrushed the rock, paper, scissor logo onto my jean jacket. And I have to say, at 16 years old, I was kind of the hit of the concert. Lots of offers to buy it, and never sold.
I, too, also won or had a cool airbrushed jacket. It was a black leather jacket that I won in 1990 or 91 at Siberia, and it's a Nine Inch Nails one. And I was offered $100 for it on the spot, and I should have taken it.
You probably should have. But do you still have the jacket?
I do. It's been like sitting in my closet in San Francisco for like, I don't know, since I had the closet.
Yeah, I have seen this jacket Brian told me about in person.
I pulled it out recently. My parents unloaded all of my old memorabilia, and so now it is in my basement, a special spot in my basement.
Yeah. So Brian, the reason we brought you in here...
So my question is it really the difference between Dave and Sammy, or did 1984, I feel like half the 1984 album really lines up with the 5150s and OU812s, and half the 1984 album is a continuation of original Van Halen.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's all good in moderation. I think the Sammy Hagar songs are a little played out. It's two different styles. They're different bands. They're more synth-oriented, sappy ballads in the Van Hagar era, and the Van Halen with David Lee Roth era is crazy arena rock.
I actually understand what you're talking about. I think that's a good description of it. Because I've never listened to early Van Halen because I don't have an older brother or sibling, and my dad didn't listen to that. But like, I just listened to the first, second, third album, and they had an album that came out every year for like 7 years leading up to 1984. And 1984, from a kid who doesn't know anything, that's probably the year I heard him besides Jump, which was maybe 83 or 82. So
no, Jump is on 1984.
Oh, it is? Okay, well, everything's on 1984 then. Where's Panama then?
1984.
Okay, so the only Van Halen album I know is 1984 until this week when I started listening to old stuff, and I like that old stuff a lot. Oh, and the reason I brought this whole long story up is because I play guitar, and Van Halen's like in a guitar magazine like once a year, right? There's the interview. And I think he was talking about how he liked going the synth direction. Like, I think Van Halen wasn't the lead singer change as much as Eddie Van Halen just wanting to do that kind of music.
Yeah, and that's what precipitated the lead singer change, was David Lee Roth wanted to do his, run around the stage, crazy arena rock, wow, with his screaming, be a conductor of a rock show. And Eddie started playing the keyboard. In fact, Eddie Van Halen, his first instrument when he was a kid, learned on piano. And then, fast forward a bit, the 1984 album, Eddie plays a bunch of keys. Jump features a lot of his keyboard playing. It's their first #1 hit. Now, I think he took the wrong lesson from that. Jump is a great song. You could play that on any instrument. You could get a clarinet, a kazoo, and an oboe out there, and it would sound great. It wasn't the keyboards that made it a #1 hit, but he saw the validation in it and was like, we're going in a keyboardist direction. And that caused David Lee Roth and Eddie to split. So it's one precipitated the other.
Doesn't David Lee Roth come back at some point too?
Yeah, he did one more album with them in 12.
How is that album?
And then they did a tour, and then they stopped, and then they pulled the tour off again, and...
Yeah, they're only going to tour. That's a lot of money for them.
All my favorite albums are before Diver Down. So I like the first 4. And 84 was a lot of good hits, but I don't like it as much. What about you, Bri?
So, I think, again, Eddie is often given interviews in Guitar Player magazine saying how much he liked playing the keyboards. And they actually had big fights on some of the earlier albums because he wanted to keep introducing keyboards, and the rest of the band kept saying, no, keep that out of here. And then the label said, look, he won Rock God Guitar Player of the Year in 1 year, and they're like, you can't now start playing keyboards, it just doesn't work that way. And he kept fighting for it. But you've got some on some of those early albums, he's got Sunday Afternoon in the Park on Fair Warning. That was the one I was looking up. It totally starts keyboard, just like one of the songs, some of the songs later on. And then he finally gets it in the beginning of 1984 and takes off saying, look, see, just like I said, everybody really wanted to see me on stage playing keyboards, and I think that drove the separation as much as anything related to Sam and Dave, but not the Sam and Dave.
I love Sam and Dave because everybody thinks they're the Beach Boys.
What do you think was the biggest selling Van Halen album of the Roth era?
I'm surely 1984.
It actually tied something else. What's the other album?
What is it?
I'd assume it's the first one, Van Halen.
Van Halen 1?
Yeah.
What was on Van Halen 1 that was so good?
Running with the Devil, Jamie's Crying, Eruption, You Ain't Talking About Love.
Okay, I see.
Well, the other thing about the first one is it had less covers than some of the other ones. They actually started doing more and more covers as they released more albums. I was just reading one of them. I didn't realize it has like 6 covers on it.
Diver Down.
It's almost, So I think I agree with you, Keith. A lot of people start Van Halen kind of right in the middle, right at 1984. Yeah. And then you either go backwards or you go forwards. And that's sort of what my question was all about. Are you allowed to go backwards and forwards, or do you have to pick a direction and stick with it?
You could call The Line in the Sand is 1984, and that's the first album of the new style Van Halen. I mean, look at 5150. Love Walks In, Dreams, Why Can't This Be Love? It's all this soft, it's almost soft rock. And then the next album, When It's Love.
Is Hagar a good singer for these songs?
David Lee Roth isn't a good... I would say Sammy Hagar is probably a better fundamental singer.
Oh, interesting.
My question about that, though, is the Ice Cream Mans and some of those other songs that he really sings as ballads, like, I guess I wouldn't say a good singer, but he's certainly a fun singer who wasn't just doing rock singing. Like, I think it's cool and just a different time where you could put Big Bad Bill on your album and have your dad play clarinet and your label still allow you to get rid of it because you had to fill the second side of a tape.
Going back to the drawing the line in the sand thing, I was actually thinking about all these bands that I think in the 80s came of age after they already had 4 or 5 albums in the catalog. So like your line in the sand albums for REM might be either Document or Green. I think Cure did this with like Disintegration. Like there's a lot of people, that's when they became fans.
Steve, we were just talking about that. You were saying with the Police.
who has careers like this now? Like, who can wait to their 5th album for it to be good? Modest Mouse maybe did this. Like, maybe we're talking about becoming popular and poppy. So Modest Mouse did this on, what, their 3rd album?
Yeah, and they had a bunch of EPs, but Van Halen started as a band in 1972. I believe by 74, David Lee Roth is in the band, and they don't have their first album until 78. So for 4 years, they're playing the Sunset Strip, they're playing Orange County, they're out in Pasadena, they're honing their craft. And to Brian's point, they have a bunch of songs in their repertoire, and by the time they got to their 4th album, they had to start littering it with covers because they wrote a lot of good songs along the way, and their songs are so fun, man. David Lee Roth era, first 4 or 5 albums, so much fun.
Yeah, you just get old and you get money, though. I mean, maybe I shouldn't have said either of those things, but I meant.
Or in Eddie Van Halen's case, you get creative. I'm an artist.
Oh, I see. Yeah, sure. You want to do more, right? It's like the Beatles.
Exactly. I figured this guitar thing out, 15 years ago already, and now everybody figured out how I did it, and they're all pecking on their strings. So, I want to go back and explore cool keyboard sounds like all the kids in the 80s are doing.
So one other thing that's interesting about 1984, and I think, Brian, you brought this up when we were chatting earlier about this, prepping in the green room. We were talking about album order. And the New Dad Rock loves album order. Just see our Modest Mouse episode and our Terror Twilight episode back in the early days.
I didn't know if it was a regular feature of the New Dad Rock album order, but when I listened to 1984 as decided, okay, that's really the turning point, not necessarily Dave versus Sammy. If you play that album backwards, it's completely different. Like if you stick Jump on the end as a keyboard song, Van Halen always would put these, what I kind of call just goofy filler songs at the end, whether they were singing barbershop quartet harmonies or Happy Trails. I really feel like 1984 played backwards is a continuation of what they had been doing, but played in the order it's played in was the launching point for the keyboards.
Yeah, well, the first track on 1984 is called 1984, and it's a little keyboard solo. Yep. Whereas that would have been buried halfway through side B. It's now the number 1 song.
What I was taken aback by was how their first albums, they actually do these weird keyboard, instrumental or atmospheric parts for the beginning of every album. I was really impressed. But that I guess that's because they had albums back in the day.
No, Keith, that was actually a point I was wondering. Like, they were fitting in Eddie's guitar, solos as like intros to other songs. They'd put on 30 seconds or a minute, and there wouldn't even be a break between Cathedral or Eruption.
You really got me.
Yeah, it would go right into. And I was trying to think, are there any other bands you could think of that was doing that was doing kind of extended solos that you might hear in their concert and just as intros to their songs, or was that some sort of special thing they always got away with?
I never listened to like Guitar Gods Who Didn't Sing or Joe Satriani, so I don't know. I get how if you accidentally recorded an awesome bit, like you'd want to include it somewhere, and it makes sense to put it like between tracks, for lack of a better term. This is vinyl, so you have to put it somewhere and attach it to something. But Pavement always has these weird like 17-second interludes.
Yeah, Modest Mouse did that a lot at the beginning of their career. But I was thinking of Metallica on Ride the Lightning and Master of Puppets and Injustice for All. All 3 of those albums start with a short instrumental piece that goes into the first song, Battery, Blackened.
Well, I mean, this is called guitar rock. I mean, this era, right? So I wonder if, like, this was sort of just, like, set the stage, like, we are this good. So as we mess around with our keyboards and our silly songs, we could still slay you.
Yeah, definitely. And you mentioned, it's interesting, you mentioned Joe Satriani and Steve Vai, and I just had a thought, how is it, so David Lee Roth, right, goes off and he starts playing with Steve Vai on Eat 'Em and Smile, and then Sammy Hagar and Mike Anthony hook up with Joe Satriani, was it, right, on Chicken Foot? So, these guys managed to attract all of the best guitar players of the era.
Yeah, and Travis Barker, the drummer from, is it Blink-182? He's on every hip-hop album now for some reason. Like, he gets executive producer credits or whatever. I think talent hangs out with talent. people like to hang out, and they're veterans. Sammy Hagar can do real work. David Lee Roth can do real work. You know they can do it. And you're also choosing a very specific sound, at least in David Lee Roth's case. You're choosing his, like, style.
Well, Sammy Hagar was already a successful singer. He was in the band Montrose. I would call them B-list classic rock. But he also had a solo career. I Can't Drive 55 was out around the same time as 1984. Yeah. That was a big hit. I remember that was on MTV. And the way the rock world works, Ted Templeman happened to be the producer of Montrose, of Sammy Hagar's solo, of Van Halen. He, quote-unquote, discovered Van Halen on the Sunset Strip. And this is after Gene Simmons, of all people, saw them and tried to get them signed. And his management's like, yeah, pass. These guys are never going to make it. Now they're number 20 all time. So
Steve, with that knowledge of how they were connected, have you found any knowledge of how Gary Cherone was connected? Because when Apple Music was suggesting, Van Halen 3 to me, and I'm going, there was no Van Halen 3 album. That was something I couldn't get behind. I could appreciate the Sam versus Dave debate, but going Gary Cherone and having the nerve to call that album Van Halen 3, I think that just that was wrong. That wasn't right.
Oh wow, that was in '98. Right. Oh wow. So it went 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9.
Change singers, 3 more really big albums, right? And then what we really meant to do was bring in Gary Cherone, and we never really liked Sammy that whole time. And
how much do you think their logo made them famous? I have a huge thing about logos.
That is a great logo. I used to love drawing the Van Halen logo
just about
on my
to say,
notebooks.
I cannot tell you how many notebooks I had and how many pages I had with perfecting that logo. Now I saw Van Halen at the Nassau Coliseum, and we had the seats directly opposite the stage, and so we said, oh, that's the banner spot. When they shoot the video and it looks directly across the stage, you've got to unfurl the banner, and of course none of us had any artistic ability, so all we did was spray paint the Van Halen logo on a white sheet and drop the banner down, and everybody booed us, and I never made a video, but we had the good spot.
Wait, did people really boo you?
I think everybody expected, if you have those seats and you're going to unfurl the banner, you need to have some artistic ability with the logo, not just a black spray painted Van Halen logo on a white sheet.
OU 812 is the first album that doesn't actually have the logo on it. Actually, Diver Down doesn't either.
Well, did 5150 have the logo on it anywhere?
Yeah, remember it was on the
Atlas
around the globe that Atlas was holding up?
Yeah.
I'm really noticing, and Keith, you brought it up with the logo, how much even Iron Maiden was influenced by Van Halen, because Iron Maiden, that was the other one I loved drawing, that font. Everybody knows that font when you see Iron Maiden written that way. And the way David Lee Roth ran around the stage doing his crazy acrobatics, jumping off of things. Bruce Dickinson is still doing that at age 60 or whatever he is now. Cancer survivor. So Van Halen, hugely influential. Are they dad rock? Definitely. Are they classic rock? Of course. Are they new dad rock? The David Lee Roth era certainly is.
One of the ways I was thinking about new dad rock is that there's all these bands that I'd listened to in the 80s and wished I was born 10 years before to sort of to wonder if I would have seen them coming up and discovered them while they was coming up. And that's a big part of sort of the new dad rock to me. If you were in the 80s and wondering what it would have been like to be 16 in 1978 as opposed to 1988, that's a big part of new dad rock for me.
It's funny, now that you've said it out loud, I realize the new dad rock, in a way, is you think you're your dad at his peak youth, but really that was even 10 years further back than you thought. Because you're right, I define dad rock the same way as when you're the teenager or you're 20 in college and you listen, you're like, man, it would have been cool to be around for the Doors or Led Zeppelin or Iron Butterfly, and that is, I guess that's 20 years before me. So that is my dad's age. So, yeah. Dad rock, I guess, is kind of established during your musical youth, and it's what your dad would have listened to when he was your age.
Well, Keith, and that's exactly what I was thinking too. I feel like Van Halen was one of the first bands that I introduced to my dad. You know, my dad was he listened to Rolling Stones. He was a huge Cream fan. He liked the Doors.
Yeah.
And that's what he listened to, you know, in his 20s. And then big Beatles guy in his teens and then 20s. And then, you know, he had kids in the early 70s, and I don't know what the heck he listened to. He was busy having kids. So I feel like Van Halen was one of the first bands that I found and brought to him, because he had this sort of missing years in the late 70s where you're busy with kids, and then you can start bringing to, you know, your dad. And that was how I thought about the New Dad.
Originally, the New Dad Rock, meaning the New Dad Rock podcast, was born out of my annoyance at hearing the same old songs everywhere I went. Hearing Panama or Jump or any of the Van Hagar songs. They've been played so much you forget how impactful they were. Their lineup is so deep.
For me, Van Halen, those early albums, if we encourage folks to go back and listen to those early albums, it was all about the flow of the albums too. Like you've often said on the New Dad Rock, like some of those early albums that went from you know, Running with the Devil to Ice Cream Man, like Van Halen 1, like the variation in that album, the Cradle Will Rock to Could This Be Magic and Hang 'Em High, and then their dad playing clarinet on Big Bad Bill. And that's why ultimately, you know, the early Van Halen, that's what really makes it for me. The flow of those albums, the amount of variation that they would have from the first just hardcore rock song to the last, you know, notes of the clarinet and 4-part harmonies. It was just great fun on all those early albums. And so that's where we always go back to those early ones.
And Van Halen made a choice at 1984. It was a crossroads. David Lee Roth went out and did Eat 'Em and Smile, Crazy from the Heat. That was the direction his view of Van Halen. And you saw which one won out in popularity, whether it holds up.
Brian, thanks for joining us. It's been awesome. Will you come back?
Sure, especially I'll break out my Rush jacket and we'll figure out where the Rush episode fits in.
Oh, good Lord, no.
Yeah, one last thing before we go. You may recall that we did an episode a couple months back about COVID live streams.
I saw this. Are you talking about Greg Dooley?
Yeah, exactly. Greg Dooley, most notably of the Afghan Wigs, also Twilight Singers, the Gutter Twins. He was the bar band in the movie Beautiful Girls.
Dude, and he sang some of the songs in that Beatles movie from the 90s, Backbeat.
Yeah, exactly. So Greg Dooley is doing a live stream on Saturday, August 1st.
I think he's doing 2 shows, one Europe time, another, is it 9 p.m. East Coast time on Saturday in California?
Yeah, I think so. He just put out a solo album this year, but it's going to be selections from throughout his career, and we are going to be discussing it in next week's episode. So thanks for tuning in.
You know, Wolfgang Van Halen's new album should be dropping soon too, so maybe we'll have to check that out, speaking of new albums.
Yeah, and as a dad, I have to say, go Wolfgang!
Dude, that's a great name. Wolfgang.
Wait, so, you know what,
if I had a boy, that would have been in the running. Anyway, thanks again, Brian. We'll have you back when we're talking about Rush.
Awesome. Thanks, guys. This has been a lot of fun.